This is Sam Long.
I'm John Nugent.
And I am Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. We're also glad to have along Todd Jones, who's been joining us the last couple episodes, talking about spiritual disciplines. We'll be talking about more about that in a second. But before we do, we want to once again talk about our graduate program. We mentioned last episode that we finally got approved through the state of Michigan, and we are gung-ho moving forward. And we wanted to give you guys a little information about that if you're thinking about it or maybe know someone who could benefit from a master's level education. Here's some information. John?
All right, just a reminder, the program is a 36-hour graduate program. You can complete the whole program for under $19,000, just to give you a perspective. And if you decide to participate in our scholarship program, you can do the whole program for around $11,000. And so lots of people have been excited about that program. And you can, reach out to the school to find more details about it. But if you're looking for a master's degree and you can come up with $11,000 over 2 years, or if you go part-time, over 4 years, it's within reach. $2,500, basically, $2,600 a year for 4 years part-time work, and you have a master's degree. So we're excited about that. The program will take you deeper and not just broaden your frame of reference of popular level books, but level you up as a thinker. And those thinking about this fall, there will be courses on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 5 p.m. to 7:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You Chicago people, it'll be 4 to 6:40.
You Hawaii people be like, I don't know.
Can't tell you.
I don't know, 10 in the morning. I don't know.
Our New Zealand listeners, we're just going to have to do it in the middle of the night. So.
Yeah, but it's synchronous education, so live time, real time with the professors. And we just want to keep that in front of you. And, reach out if you have questions.
Yeah, I will be teaching one of the classes in the fall. I hope.
You hope.
Get it together by then.
What class is that?
Is preaching and teaching from basically a Bible with two testaments. And so the idea of integrating both testaments together. We by we I mean most preachers, happy to talk about the New Testament and use the Old Testament when it's convenient, but hopefully we'll improve upon that and talk about how the whole story fits together and how we can preach and teach better and see a more cohesive story instead of just the post-Jesus stuff.
Yeah. What I love about this class is, a lot of people, they just have New Testaments and they don't really know how to read it in light of the Old Testament. Or people finally get the Old Testament and they don't quite know, now that they realize how important and cool the Old Testament is, they allow it to even sometimes overshadow some things in the New Testament. Right? Yeah. And so, at the college level, we really teach you how to read the Bible forward, right? Like read it in kind of chronological sequence in light of the unfolding of salvation history to kind of help read the Bible on its own terms in its own context. But there's a deeper hermeneutic after that. Like once you've read it forward, that frees you up to read it backward so that you learn to read the Old Testament on its own terms and as something that's pointing to Jesus, where those two are not in conflict with one another. And then you read the New Testament on its own terms, both as the continuation of the story, but in light of everything that you've had from the Old Testament. And so reading both Testaments simultaneously in light of each other in a way that doesn't, eclipse any Testament's unique contributions. So I'm geeked about that being in our curriculum, and I'm glad you get to teach it.
Oh, thanks. Me too.
Looking forward to
getting started on that at some point.
I kind of wish I could sit in on that class. I'd love to hear the things you're going to say on that. So
I'll give you the footnotes.
Yeah, and Paul will be teaching an advanced introduction to biblical studies, right? Yeah. Or is it to the Old Testament? No, this is to biblical studies in general.
I'm in my own lane. I don't know.
Not my class, not my responsibility.
So we're excited. And again, if you're interested or people, ministers, elders, people who would be interested in that, please send them our way. We'd love to have a really full cohort starting out. So, all right. Todd hasn't said anything this whole time.
Just kind of hanging out over there listening.
I don't have any news. That's what it is. So okay, we're ready to dive in?
Only if you are.
I'm so ready. Let's go.
See, Todd, you make this master's program possible. because you're helping teach some of the courses in the undergrad that free us up to be able to teach in the graduate program. So an indispensable part of it. If we didn't hire you, I'm not sure we're in a position to offer this program.
That's okay. Yep.
Yeah,
You're
an
welcome, I guess.
invaluable cog in this giant
I've had to
machine.
hand over my precious theology courses that I've been doing for like 20 years to someone, and I feel really good that someone is you.
Oh my word. Okay.
My students are in good hands.
We need to change the subject soon. 'Cause this is not a crying podcast. Thank you for that.
I don't know. The tears are beginning to run down my face even as we're speaking.
Well, I know none of you have emotions, but I do. So
John does. You're talking about.
Yeah, I'm highly
John
emotional.
feels things deeply here. He'll make a very strong argument for that. We've had those good conversations.
Yes, for another episode.
Another episode, sure.
Well, wonderful compliments aside, we're continuing in our spiritual discipline series that you may recall we're using Richard Foster as an outline for. He has outlined 12, and we made a big deal in the beginning. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a really helpful starting place. We want to use his work in order to springboard and then do the after class thing and kind of kick these ideas around, work our way through our own understandings of these disciplines. And so today marks a transition, the first of the transitions from inward to outward disciplines. So this is the moment when we're no longer thinking in terms of like how are we just as an individual benefiting from this exercise, but we're thinking about how we as an individual are existing with an outward expression that's observed by others. And again, it's not drawing hard lines like nobody can ever see the benefits of when you are praying or when you are studying. But in this case, you'll see when we get to Foster's definition, there's a decisive overlap between the inward life and the outward life and how that begins to display itself. And so without further ado, let's get into Foster's definition. And I biased us really badly last time on the study definition. So I want to overcorrect and say I really appreciate, there's a lot that I really appreciate about this definition. So without further ado, Foster's definition for simplicity. Have I even said it yet? I don't
I was
don't
just about
think
to
so.
make that point.
No.
We haven't
Oh,
told
okay.
people what our topic is yet today. So.
Nailed it. Caught it just in the nick of time. So
Just in
the
the nick
discipline for today, the hinge discipline between inward and outward disciplines, simplicity. So here's what Foster defines simplicity as: an inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle.
So a lot of silence there.
The long sigh.
Yep. Before we started recording today, we had an all-staff meeting, all the faculty staff. We were together. And I was sitting across from Greg Stauffer. So, hey, Greg, I know you listen all the time. Greg said in the previous episode, you gave the definition, and we basically all just piled on and talked about how bad it was. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize we did that, but that's going to make me think about how I approach things going forward.
I'm not.
I-
I'm not
I
affected.
realized we did that.
Yeah, I feel like if I say anything, it's just going to be piling on again. Greg's going to come back and say, you did it again.
But it's not just about piling on. It's not just about critiquing. I mean, talking about definitions is how you plumb the depths of what something is.
I agree.
It's like you're 7/10 of the way there if you've defined it properly. So it's not just, when we enter into these rants, it's partly picking on the definition, but partly like, what about this? I'd like
Right.
to explore this aspect or that aspect. Anyway, I wouldn't consider it like 30 minutes of piling against the definition, but like
Refining the definition.
Nuancing.
Yeah.
Destroying.
On that note,
exploring the topic.
it feels like this definition has nothing to do with simplicity.
That's full
That's,
on.
that's why I felt bad. I'm reading the definition going, I'm going to pile on. I feel like,
I think it does, but it's so kind of generic that I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like an inward reality of what?
yeah.
Of peace, of contentment, of simplicity. It could be what the inward reality could be lots of things, not necessarily related to simplicity, that then leads to an outward lifestyle. Yes. But it's too generic for me.
You can say about love, right?
Sure.
Love it. An
Yeah.
inward thing that points to an outward thing.
Right.
But let's remember
Fill
this,
in the blank.
This occurs in a chapter called Simplicity.
Sure. Yes.
So, hopefully we're starting with at least, this is not tabula rasa where we're like, here's a random definition. What does this word mean? So if we're thinking about simplicity, does
Okay.
this definition move us in that direction?
Yes, I'd like more. An inward reality of something that leads me to an outward lifestyle.
reflecting that something.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's just it. This beginning place could be the beginning place of anything. Like you said, John, it could be love. It could be, critical thinking. Like there's just so many things that could begin with this. And so for us to bring it into simplicity, to define that term, we're going to have to keep working here.
I will say, I like that he locates it and it's a disposition. It starts with a disposition. That's important because, you don't just decide, I'm not going to have stuff. If you make that decision, it comes from another place. And so I do appreciate that you have to have a starting point, that you've made up your mind inwardly that this is how I'm going to live and why I'm going to live, and it results in this other thing. I'm for that. So not to pile on too much. Throw him a bone.
Yep, as we already have. It seems like with simplicity, like the opposite of it is complexity. You have something that's simple versus something that's complex. And so like that's the first place that my mind has gone on that some things are just complex. That's just the way it is. And so simplicity seems to be a deliberate choice to say, I'm going to move away from that complex towards something that it's simple. It's easy to understand. It's easy to explain. I'm not saying this is the full definition, but as I'm beginning to think what makes something simple, that's part of it. It is very easy to understand. It's very easy to explain. It's almost like you can hand it to a small child. That child's like, yeah, I understand it. Simplicity is that kind of a concept.
I feel like you could use the same definition with complexity.
You mean complexity is an inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle?
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah. it's like, it's the kind of thing you can start anywhere. Like anything can emerge out of that. And so we've got to move towards something that adds some substance to it that helps us go, oh, yeah, that's what simple is.
Let's move toward Todd's definition.
Okay.
Superior.
Well, okay. I already let the cat out of the bag that I like Foster's definition. There's some things I think it's doing really well that are really important, one of which Sam identified. Something that he makes a big deal about in the chapter is that simplicity brings freedom. But so his definition of simplicity is freedom. He kind of will just, it's freedom, full stop. You're like, okay, well, what does that actually mean?
Right.
The action step is inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle. And so I've actually got 3 definitions for this one, in part because, again, just trying to explain things in the English language, we get more precise by using more words. That's, this isn't German. And so I've got 3 different definitions that sort of approach 3 different ways of understanding and applying what I think simplicity is. And I would say that I sort of would loop Foster's in as a 4th and say, if you put all of these together, I think this is a helpful picture of what we mean by simplicity. So I'm actually going to change the order of what I would teach in class, because I want us to start to zero in on what I think is at the core of simplicity. So I'm going to use the one I used first here. And that definition is not being mastered by our impulse to accumulate and consume. So the spiritual discipline of simplicity is not being mastered by our impulse to accumulate and consume.
Yeah, I like that. Because that is a pretty big temptation in our culture today. In fact, I think this weekend is the subdivision garage sale. So like everybody's got their stuff out there, and I don't have enough stuff, so I'm going to get more stuff. But it's cheaper stuff because I'm not paying full price for my stuff. And and my wife and I have multiple times we talked about just this idea of when we move, it's so freeing, to use Foster's word, to get rid of stuff, because why do we have this thing? Right? And why did we even buy this in the first place? And we don't usually have an answer for that. And so this idea of there's something in us that I need this thing because I could use it this one time, right? You ever bought that? Like, I can see its place where this would be used. Does that ever happen? No, but I have it just in case. And like, where does that impulse come from?
Well, yeah, and I think that's the second part of that idea of consuming, because that's such an American trait. Consumption is just what Americans do. And it takes me back to the SCJ that we were at a few weeks ago. talking about that overconsumption. I think in the context they were just talking about food.
Right.
Like we just overconsume. And I think we talked, like when you, at the end of the day, when you're eating popcorn, not because you're hungry, because you just feel like you have to or whatever. And so simplicity, I think, looks at that kind of an impulse and that pattern that's a part of our lives and says, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to dial it back. I'm going to lead a more simple life. And using the food analogy, to dial back how much so that it's a more simple approach to my diet, for example.
Yeah, I like that this definition gets more specific. It's a certain posture towards stuff. And here it's just defining it in the negative, right? Resisting, an overconsumptive approach to stuff. And I think that's gets more to the heart of simplicity as a discipline.
Yeah, that's a great segue to what I think is a more positive definition or proactive step, which I usually would say first, keeping things in their proper place. Simplicity is about keeping things in their proper place.
Yeah, I really like this one in terms of framing things. But when I was trying to think of a definition of simplicity, to me it's about prioritizing. Like, what are the most important things? How do you keep them at the forefront? And to have the self-control to say things that are not a part of the most important things that we are committed to take on a lesser role in our life. So we're simplifying by deprioritizing things that don't belong as a priority, consuming our time, energy, and resources.
Well, I like that as well. It makes me think of what Paul says. God is not the God of disorder, but the God of order. That he created an orderly world. It seems like part of the effects of sin is to take the orderliness that God has brought in and to create disorder or chaos or whatever out of it. And so this definition about keeping things in their proper place, that's a very godly way of looking at things. It's about thinking, okay, God, you know where everything belongs. Help me to see the world through that lens. And so once everything is in its proper place, yeah, that's a very simple approach to life, maintaining that kind of simplicity. And so I see a biblical precedent for that in the language of Paul.
I'm for all this. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Where do we draw the line between, because in here you talk about wants versus needs, right? Where do we draw the line between God providing our needs and God being abundant, the God of abundance, who gives blessings above and beyond? Like, so if I have all this stuff, is that a sign of God's blessing, or is it a sign of my desire to consume and accumulate?
It makes me think about the Old Testament, like what God says: if you keep Torah, if you keep these commands, it's like you will be fruitful in the stalls, like in flocks in the stalls. Or
Yeah, not the bathroom stalls, to be clear.
To be very clear, your fields will be, but the things that are listed in abundance are the things that provide for life.
Okay.
Or like in the kingdom, you'll have hundredfold mothers and brothers and sisters, right? This multiplication of family, this multiplication of your resources provided for. So it's biblical abundance focuses on, I guess, the central things, and not necessarily like American abundance is like being wealthy in things that don't matter.
All the widgets and what's a hootsits and things that we add on to. Okay.
The latest TV, the latest phone.
So this hits me at home because, more and more I try to live a very agrarian kind of a life. And at this time of year, I'm getting my garden ready to go. And when I talk about my garden is a third of an acre. Okay, it's big because I just happen to have land that I can build this big garden on. And so I know how much I would have to plant in order to provide for me and my wife. I mean, that's my household. My daughter is grown. She has her own kids. So I could just plant enough for me and my wife, and we would have all that we need. But my instinct is to say, no, I have all the space. How do I expand upon that? Not so I can just provide for my own household, but so that my daughter and her husband, their kids, and even beyond that, friends and family. It's not how do I consume it, but how do I be generous with it? How do I take what God has given me and say, all right, God, I'm going to use this in such a way that I have an abundance so that I can meet the needs of the people around me. And it's not even just those, it's not just giving my friends, because pretty much all my friends can take care of themselves. But the question we're always asking is, who do we know that maybe we could pass this on to who actually legitimately has a need, you know? And so it's nice that, like when I'm doing maple syrup, I can bring in bottles for people and share it. But the big question is, how can I take from my abundance and then transfer that to people who cannot provide for themselves? And to me, that's the antidote for consumption is generosity. I've got things that I can give away, and I will do that. So generosity to me is the opposite of consumption.
I might add that I think abundance as a theme in Scripture is about removing our fear about an uncertain future.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the connection is always there will be plenty, so don't worry. It's not there will be plenty, so you should definitely fill your guts with 20 double cheeseburgers. Which when I think of abundance, I immediately go to I have enough that I can eat it all. I have enough that I can spend it all. But I think it's about in a more agrarian society, I have enough so I don't have to worry about how the lean months are going to go before the next harvest. That would be the picture of abundance that I would want to bring to mind, which is I think where John began, what Ron continued to say, and what I just want to piggyback on. Yeah, maybe there's more I can say about that, but you were beginning to talk.
No,
as well.
I mean I think that's important. I'm going to put this out there, and you can test me on whether this is working. So this is based on what you said, John. That a lot of it has to do with kind of like there are these needs, these central things that are part of what it means to be human, right? Family, food, right? I wonder if it's things that are one step removed from those. So God's going to bless me with a bountiful lemon harvest. Do I need the lemon zester to then, right?
Right.
I'm going to have a garlic harvest. Do I need the garlic press thing? Like, it's like, it's one removed that's doing things with those things, but it's not those things. It's not the abundance is in the primary thing, not the secondary and tertiary things. I don't know. That's what I was thinking of as you were talking about that.
Well, if I'm going to take that, I don't know if I'm going the direction you're going, Sam, but
I know where I'm going.
No, I think it's an interesting question because Suzanne and I have just been talking about this because my big joke is that the Peters are feeders, okay? This is what we do. We feed people. I grow it, Suzanne cooks it, and then we just disperse it to the people around us. And so we can talk about the food that I'm growing out on the farm. But Suzanne's also looking at, pots and pans and like the tools of cooking, like that's what you were just talking about. And we could say we have everything we need to cook everything that we want for ourselves. It's like, no, we're not thinking that way. Suzanne's like, how do I cook food for people? And she does that. She's taking food to people on a regular basis. And so the tools of doing that is a part of the abundance. It allows her to then be that person who can provide for others. And so it's going beyond consumption. It's generosity. And what are the tools of generosity? And how can we look at what we have as a tool of us being generous people?
Yeah, and where simplicity comes in is Peters are feeders. Like that's your ministry. That's where you get abundant in. That's where you buy the extra zester and all the tools that will make that ministry, more productive and more fruitful for the people you're trying to serve.
Right.
But saying the Peters are not painters and roofers and this and that and the other thing, like simplifying your life so that you have a few basic ministries that you operate in. And that's how you keep your life simple. It's like, I don't have all the gifts that the body needs. I don't have all the resources that all my neighbors need, but I invest heavily in this thing and I prioritize it, and it becomes, a tool in God's hand that he can use to bless a lot of people.
I think that's a really, really good point because I think a lot of people feel like they just have to be good at everything. And your point is very, very, it's such a fantastic point because you and I have talked about this on other occasions that sometimes to not be good at something is a gift because you're creating a vacuum for somebody else to fill. And to be willing to say, I know where I'm strong, I know where I'm weak, and just to own it so that you can say, I'm going to focus on this, but not this. Don't ask me to. I'm not going to do it well. You're going to be really sad with the results, but that's okay because God will raise up somebody to fill that. And you're right. That's a simple way of viewing the world. It allows you to say yes where you should and no where you shouldn't. and knowing that God will raise up that person to fill the gap where you had to say no.
And not spreading yourself so thin because you make too many commitments.
Right.
You've made life too complex.
Yeah, exactly.
And simplicity, and this is going to get into your next definition. So I guess I don't want to say it. I'll stop there and allow you to pivot there if Sam's happy with where he wanted that
I'm
discussion
just
to go.
posing questions. I'm never happy.
Well, keeping things in their proper place is about wants and needs, in my estimation. So this is moving in a little bit different direction. Though the final definition, I think, rounds out sort of the four corners of simplicity as I teach it in class. Winning the battle of self-control. Asking questions like, why do I want this? Do I desire something new and shiny to distract me from having to face some other reality in my life? Winning the battle of self-control.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, yeah, it's
As a part, right? You have these
Yeah.
different parts. We're looking at the same thing from different angles, and that's what I was saying. Like the self control is, this is the area of my gifting that I invest the most in, and I don't want to be gifted at everything, and I
Right, yeah.
can't do everything,
Yeah.
and I really want to do everything. This is one of the things I've had to do in this job. Now that I'm vice president of academics for the past couple of years, is, man, there are things that my work here at the campus used to revolve around that they can't anymore. And I don't want to let them go, but I want to embrace this new thing. But I can't fully do this new thing unless I let go of the other things. And it's the lack of self-control is to say, I want to do it all and I can do it all and I'm going to work hard to make it all happen. And then my life gets so fractured and divided and I'm pulled in too many directions. It becomes really, really complex. And what I really need to do is simplify, like narrow down what is my role here, how can I do it the best I can to serve the people I've been appointed to serve, which means I have to let go of some other forms of service that used to be really important to me. So to me, it is a matter of self-control, like saying, I can't do it all. What is it that God has called me to do most?
I think that I do want to give people permission to try things. Like it's okay to say, okay, yeah, I'll give that a try. Because that's how you learn where you're going to excel. Like you don't know. Like I had no idea I was going to be a Greek scholar till I took Greek. And so I'm so glad that I did that. So sometimes you have to experience things in order to begin to figure out where you excel and where you don't. So don't be afraid to say yes, but also recognize that sometimes you're going to try something out and you're going to go, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's okay to be able to recognize that and say, you know what? Gave it a try. This isn't working out so well. And then to be able to move on from that. Because I think that we can be paralyzed by fear too. It's like, oh, I don't know if I should even get it a try. So allow a little bit of space for that experimentation where you can try new things, but don't be afraid to go, yeah, I gave it a try. It didn't work out so well. That's okay. That's just part of how we live and learn.
And I'm also a fan of, like, if someone needs your help and it's not in the area of your gifting, you're going to try to help them anyway.
Oh, right,
you know what I'm saying? It's just like not using my life is simple. This is my gift. Peters or feeders. So if you need help on this, sorry, I don't help people move.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But like, what's your main thing going to be? But you'll
Right.
also operate in other areas to be of service to other people. But there's going to be order in place. That's going to be the minority
point.
of ways you serve, not the main thing that is your constant.
Yeah, because they're going to be, sometimes you're just going to be the only person who can help out. And so you're like, yeah, I'm not always good at this, but I'm not going to say no. You're right. That's a really good point. There's just balance in all of this. And I guess there's a simplicity to understanding that balance. I can say yes today because you need my help and I love you.
I can say no because moving couches is not my spiritual gift. That's fine.
I don't think it's anybody's spiritual gift, to be quite honest.
I would say I like how this definition, the battle of self-control, does get back to that straddling between internal and external. Like until there is the self-reflection to get at why am I doing these things, then you can't move forward. And so I do appreciate that. And to be honest, I think most of us don't really stop to reflect. Like we see something like, oh, that looks cool, I'm going to get it. And we don't like go through the whole thing of like your questions are like, is it to distract me from something? I don't think we think that. Maybe that's going on below the surface, but like, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to, or I can use this at some point in the future. And we pick it up and we just add it to the constantly growing clutter. And what this discipline I think does is it forces us to be self-reflective, and we need more of that. At the very least, it's doing that. And so this is where we're getting a little to Foster's the inward reality. Well, we have to reach that reality first. And so this is, I think, part of that process.
And self-control fills a niche in this definition that I'm not going to suggest is lost on people in positions like yours. Like you guys have had to live in financial discipline for your entire adult lives because you've chosen careers that are not abundantly lucrative financially. Is that the polite way to say that? So there's,
acceptable.
and it's not like you can't relate to the impulse to go and buy something. But I have encountered people in my life in ministry who have just an overwhelming amount of money, to the amount of money that you're not going to spend it in your lifetime unless you try pretty hard to use it up. And the way that simplicity might look for them involves a kind of active reflection about self-control that's different from us. There's a lot of self-imposed rather. There's externally imposed self-control is what I meant to say, where we don't have a choice. There's no money, right? What are you going to go and you can't just go and buy like a new Tesla because it's fast and you want to try out a really fast car. I've met a person who has impulse bought a Tesla. I can't relate to that.
Nope.
No,
I'm
I have
like,
no idea what that's like.
and I'm sure you guys can't either, right? But there is a, like, if the simplicity definition is going to capture kind of all audiences and all experiences, there's many levels on which we relate to winning a battle of self-control as an act of simplicity. But there might be a whole kind of category of people who are going, that's actually the bit that I need. There is a way in which, to connect back to some of the generosity stuff that Ron shared, there's a way in which I need to think differently about purchases because there are no consequences for me to be wasteful.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, there are many.
Well, I think it's a uniquely American thing that we face. It's not that you don't have rich people in other cultures, but it's certainly something that you see way more in the Western culture and especially in America. And I think there are a lot of listeners out there who are like, "Oh, wow, that's actually kind of hitting close to home." I think, Todd, you've given people something to think about. I do have an abundance, and what do I do with it? Can I be an impulse buyer? Yeah, challenge yourself to say, you know what? God has given you an abundance. Look around you, and where are there people who they could really use your help? And God has uniquely equipped you to be able to step in and say, got you covered. I can take care of that.
All right, I've got one you're going to like. Hopefully a lot, because this is one of those, like, man, it'd be like a Twitter bomb kind of thing, or X or whatever that thing is. This is my favorite quote from the entire book, from Foster's entire book. I'm just going to give it to you. Too much fanfare. We buy things we do not need to impress people we do not like. This is his summation of American culture. It reads like Ecclesiastes to me, and I think this is simplicity, is like recognizing the absurdity of how our accumulation is actually taking shape and what often motivates it. Buying things we don't need to impress people we don't even like. Like, yeah, that is I've seen that in action in every church that I've been a part of on some level.
I think I recognize that. I haven't read this book in forever. It's been probably decades since last time I read. But as soon as you read that, I'm like, that quote just stood out in my mind, and it's hilarious. We laugh because it's funny, but I think we laugh because it's true. That any one of us at some point is probably fallen into that trap, and it's like, why do I care about what you think? But for some reason, because we are created to be these social creatures, that other people's opinions do matter at some point. And so the ability to recognize that and to consciously go, all right, I know that I have this impulse, but I'm not going to act on it. That's a simple life. I don't need it. I don't need to impress this group of people. I'm going to go with that simplicity approach to this.
I'm trying hard to think of an example of that in my life.
Yeah, when he brought that up, I'm like, that previous statement you made about us, having chosen a profession that's not lucrative, like, this hasn't really been a temptation. I believe what you're saying is true, and
Yes.
it might apply to a lot of Americans, and maybe it takes a certain amount of excess, right, income to get there. Or maybe it's, we might be in careers where we're a little more self-confident that we're not trying to impress people we don't like. But yeah, I see it as being very American, and the way culture is presented on TV, the people I hang with, maybe less so.
Maybe new pickleball paddle. Maybe that may buy my vice.
No, actually, I can actually think of a time in my early 20s when I can think of one purchase that was like, no, I think in hindsight, I was trying to impress people with it. Because, my story is just a little bit different. I went to Bible college when I was 28, and so I had a period in my early 20s where I was actually making money and all that. Not tons, but enough money to where I could make those kinds of stupid decisions. And I can think of one where it's like, yeah, I think I was trying to impress people with that decision. So, yeah, I've been there in my life.
Well, even down to the level, the first house I ever bought in Kalamazoo, I was like, I need my lawn to look a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
That thought has never crossed my mind, and I've never driven by somebody's lawn and thought, ooh, yeah, what a lawn. I do not care about grass. I could not really care less about grass. And then now I own a house, and there's this added thing. Like, what if my house was like, what if I had like the nicest yard on the block or something? What are you doing? What is that? Where's that coming from? And why would you crave that on any level? And to do that would be relatively free. Get the flat shovel and go out and cut the edges and do like, why am I going to invest time on that when I've got these other things that are more pressing? That's, and that's not buying things. But anyway, I bring that quote up in part just to move us on to the concept of clutter. Sam brought this up early, and I resisted the temptation to focus on it then. But I describe in class, I describe possessions like a gas in the solid, liquid, and gas kind of states of matter comparison. Possessions expand to fill whatever container they're in. When you buy a house, you will fill that house up with stuff eventually. When you downsize a house, which is not a common thing that happens, but you end up throwing stuff away, and you have that experience Sam said of like, oh, it's so freeing to get rid of all this junk I didn't need. But if you doubled the size of your house within a couple years, it would be all full of things. And, so anyway, let me just introduce that just generally. What do you all think about clutter and simplicity?
I hate clutter. I love as little as possible, and yet you're exactly right. When we moved from Tennessee to Kentucky, we moved from a parsonage that was like, I don't know, 3-4 bedrooms to a 700 square foot cabin. And we had to just jettison so much stuff because one, there was no room, and two, we realized, why do we have this crap, right? And then we moved again here to Michigan, and now we have a larger place, and now we have a shed full of stuff. And it like, what are we doing with our lives? There's stuff in the back of the shed that I've seen in years, but it's there. And for my wife especially, clutter ruins her mental state. Like, she comes home from work and she looks, and the counter's got a bunch of stuff on it, and she can't be at peace with all the stuff laying around. And so, for her well-being, but also like I don't love it either. We try to keep organized, which means we got to get rid of stuff and basically she says, if we don't have a place for it, we are not going to buy it. Like, yep, I love that, because then it keeps you from accumulating stuff that you don't really need. And if you're going to get it, then you're going to have to get rid of something. And so I think that's a good practice to avoid the cluttering.
Well, I'd say the same thing about my wife. She hates clutter. And sorry, I have my voice did a funny thing there. Last year we
get really sentimental about it.
I know, right? I just feel so sad about getting rid of these things. Last year we cleaned out our basement because it had gotten cluttered. And we just realized that there were things that we didn't need. And it was great. And she's just like, we're going to do the same thing this year. She just wants to keep cleaning out the house because she doesn't want that clutter. She is the opposite of a hoarder. She is the anti-hoarder. And so getting rid of all that, it's a way of saying what you just said there, Sam. Why do we have it? We don't need it. We can give it away or have a garage sale or whatever. But we don't need this amount of excess. And so finding a place for the clothes, for whatever it is that we have, is another way of simplifying your life. But it still goes back to, you can be the person who's going to either throw it away and not care, sell it in a garage sale, which is not all wrong, but you can also be the kind of person that says, let's find somebody who needs it. There's still that generosity mindset of like, we've got too much, let's find those who are in need and take from our abundance and fill up what they lack. And so generosity can still find its way into that action. It's that internal disposition that's manifests itself in an action.
Yeah, Beth and I are in the same place where we both don't like clutter, and we both don't operate at our best, think at our best when we're surrounded by clutter. We have to tidy it up first, then we can be productive. And when my office is in a state of chaos, I can't do anything, or I do everything not at peace. But yeah, but again, when I think about clutter, I guess for me the simplicity thing is less about stuff, and it is about my time, my commitments, my life. I can clutter my schedule with things that I don't need, that don't serve the kingdom, that make me busy, but are not bearing kingdom fruit. So that's much harder for me to say no.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your desk looks so much better than mine or Sam's.
Not
You
even
left,
close.
you left me out of there too. I think I might have the prize for the messiest desk. I'm not sure.
I don't
disagree.
know. Take a look over there. I mean, I just cleaned mine up a little bit. John, your desk is always neat. I give
Well,
you.
everything that's on my desk is something I have to do. It's a
Right.
to-do list, and if there's a big mess, then I'm losing track of everything I have to do, and then like what important thing am I not going to do, or that I'm leaving behind because I wrote it down on that paper, and it's there until I resolve it, and I'm worried about neglecting people or needs or things that the school needs or professors need because I'm not organized to know what I need and what people need from me. Yeah.
You might say simplicity is about putting the needs near the top and letting the wants drift away.
Recycle.
Get out the
bin.
finger guns.
Yeah. So two things. First, you brought up a point. I don't want to get too derailed, but you brought up the idea of a hoarder, and which is it's more and more it's becoming a mental issue where people are just unable to give up stuff. There's sentimentality attached to it, and like I don't think any of us are that. Right, for various reasons, but it's a real thing, and so I don't want to diminish people who are struggling with it and say, oh, just like give up your stuff. Like, how hard is it? Apparently it's really hard.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but for them it's really hard. And I would say probably with a lot of these disciplines, some probably come easier for us, and some will be more difficult. And for us in this room, simplicity probably is pretty easy. But I'm sure there are listeners out there who they struggle with and wonderful God-fearing people. Like one of my wife's very good friends, she just struggles because, like I said, everything has a memory attached to it, and she just can't. She doesn't want to get rid of it, right? And so, so I just want to say that as an aside. Again, don't have to get derailed completely on that. But another thing that I think that John brought up is simplicity. Like for us, I think it needs to go beyond stuff, because stuff is not where we struggle, right? We struggle with scheduling, with adding, with filling our time in the same way that you would fill a house with stuff. We fill our time with activities and meetings and interactions, and they're all fine and good. Just like a garlic press is fine and good until it's not. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because for me that's where it gets the application for me, is what I need to challenge myself to just do more stopping and less filling.
Looking to you, Todd.
Have you all heard of Marie Kondo?
I have.
Do you know anything about Marie Kondo?
She's about getting rid of stuff, and she's kind of new agey weird.
I do not know this name.
Well, so her shtick, so to speak, she's a professional organizer, and this sort of became a thing. She had her time in the sun with like a Netflix special or something around her. Her mantra, for lack of a better term. Now she does sound kind of new agey and weird, but the thing that she repeats so often is, "Does this object spark joy?" And that's the criteria that you use.
Is that your new agey?
I feel pretty good about my assessment. Everything you're saying
You
fits
said
right
spark.
In. Yeah. Does this spark joy when you hold it in front of you?
But think about that as a criteria. If you were to pick up everything in your house and say, is this igniting some kind of positive reaction in me, or do I feel nothing about this? And if I feel nothing about it, if it's adding nothing to my life or rhythms, routine, if it's adding nothing to anything, I should remove it as a means of achieving the mechanics of simplicity. Marie Kondo became sort of like the face of simple living, simple lifestyle. And she wanted to limit people to 7, if memory serves. 7 kind of primary objects that are like your spark joy objects. And the criteria that she used was, does this bring joy into your life? And she used the language of spark, if that's too new agey, right? Not do you like this? Do you think this is neat? But is this something that you need? And the criteria used is joy. I bring her up in class. We have a lot of discussion about this in class, but I'll just submit it to you guys. Is there a difference between Christian simplicity as a spiritual discipline and what I now hopefully have brought you up to speed on, how a Marie Kondo type would pursue a lack of stuff?
Go ahead, John. You can get a takedown.
Well, see, joy as a telos or an outcome is a tricky one because joy is the thing. Joy is not a thing you like wake up trying to get or do, right? I think Phil Kennison has a great definition of joy in his book Life on the Vine on the fruit of the Spirit. But it's like joy is the product of doing something else for its own sake, right? And then you get joy. You receive joy. It's like an outcome, and so there is it's tricky trying to program your life for joy, and it can be self-serving, right? And not other directed. And so, but I like the idea of identifying a criteria, right, by which you evaluate the stuff. And there might be something I choose to keep, not because it brings me joy, or not even because I have a sentimental thing attached to it. I keep it. I kept a rototiller at my house for like 10 years. I don't have a garden, but I have a shed, and lots of people in the church need a rototiller once a year, right? And I keep it because it allows me to serve others. And you can connect that and say, and serving others brings me joy, right? So you can tie it in that way. But I guess I'd want to use more of a kingdom-oriented criteria and not like how does it make me feel, but like how does it help me be of service for the kingdom, I guess.
Yeah, that was my biggest critique, is that sounds very selfish. It's all about what does this do for me? And I think that's a misunderstanding of possessions and what God has blessed us with. It's not just about what it does for me. It's God's. How can it be used for God's kingdom? On a separate note, I'll give you an example. Like, I keep a lawnmower. I don't feel joy, but I got to mow my lawn. So I'm not sure what to do about that from her perspective.
Yeah, right. If you're using her, sorry, I realized I was
were way
leaning
back.
In the next room talking to us.
Rod is way off there. Yeah, I agree with that. That it seems like joy there's a place for joy. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit, but I'm not sure that it's the best criterion to use for evaluating something's place in our lives. Yeah, at least it's not a good starting point.
So maybe if you first categorize all the things that are needs, if we get into the want category,
Okay.
right? My recreational category, if you have this for the whole purpose of recreation or entertainment and it's not bringing you joy, why do you still have it? I think that would be a helpful place for it.
Yep. Yeah, because there's so many neat things. Like, I have to have this thing, but I don't love it. Like, I wake up in the morning saying, yes, it's mow the lawn day. Like, that's not how I feel. I don't hate it, but that's not. I don't feel the other way about it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that Beth and I, now that we're empty nesters, it crosses our mind, and lots of other of our friends our age, like, we have this big house, and the reason we had this big house is because we had children, and we needed all these rooms. Well, now we don't, and are we going to downsize? Which would be a big act of simplicity. And our answer for the foreseeable future is no, because that space is of service. That space allows us to use the gifts of hospitality. That space gives our church a place for Bible studies, our neighbors a place to jump in the pool, our shed a place to store other people's things.
Rototillers.
And so yeah, it's tricky, but you're having to prioritize. There's a simplicity to leaving that space unused. Like, I don't have to fill every space with things I enjoy or that give me joy, but I dedicate space to kingdom use and service.
Yeah, I think there's this really niche example that maybe some of our audience can relate to, that I'm going to use the language that it proves that this isn't the best criteria. Have you ever been to a conference, a seminar, significant event, and you were handed some kind of makeshift Ebenezer of something to remember that event, right? Here's this stone that's going to be in your pocket, or here's a thing you're going to put on your keychain, or here's like a coin, or whatever. You now have this object that is reminding you of something that is not joy. It's reminding you, in some case, like, I am not the person that I want to be, and I want to remember my past failings so that I can move forward into something new. And if we just quibble with words and tweak that 1,000 ways, we might be able to figure out a way to define that as joy. But I think about if I were to write a message on my bathroom mirror in the morning that's be better, something along those lines, and I wake up in the morning and I see that, and there's a twinge of shame over knowing I didn't live up to that yesterday, and I'm moving into my day going, I don't want to do that. I'm going to redouble my efforts, and I'm going to commit myself in discipline. I would argue in some ways this is a spiritual discipline of simplicity, to just say, I am going to narrow down. I'm not going to distract myself with objects and stuff. I'm not going to distract myself by being so busy that my day is full and I can't think about it. I have this very simple reminder that is a conviction level reminder. And somebody might have gotten stuck on my use of the word shame or guilt or something. But I think that there's a kind of healthy shame and a really unhealthy shame. And it's a lot of nuance to that. But I would argue sort of against Marie's kind of system, which is mostly for corporate structures and for people who are struggling with hoarding. Just as a Christian discipline, you can maintain something that makes you very uncomfortable, like an object that you don't like what it does to you, except that you need it to do that specific thing. And I've had that experience a few times in my life, and it does not meet this criteria.
Agree. Who needs those reminders?
I probably have too many of those. Maybe my simplicity is getting rid of all those shameful reminders in my life.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd, for leading us another interesting conversation. Hope you got something out of this discussion of simplicity. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode of the After Class podcast.
After class, because
The best conversations happen
After class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio editing and mixing is done by Drew Nyquist. Episode images and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris.